Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 6th episode in our webinar series, Eating Close to Home, Fostering Local Food Production During COVID-19. My name is Katie Koroleski, and I am a PhD student in the Animal Welfare Program at UBC's Faculty of Land and Food Systems. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Each of you today are joining us from many places, near and far, and I'd also like to encourage the traditional caretakers of, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional caretakers of those lands. I would encourage everyone to take a moment and situate yourselves in place. On whose territories do you currently reside? How are you accountable to the people of those lands? If you don't know whose territories you're on, we'd encourage you to begin that learning journey by doing some research to find out. One way you can do this is by going to native-land.ca. Today is our 6th installment in our webinar series, Building Resilient Food Systems During COVID-19 and Beyond. This series is brought to you by the Centre for Sustainable Food Systems, the BC Food Web, and the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. The Centre for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm is a teaching and research center, as well as a local to global food hub, working towards a more sustainable, food-secure future. Their mission is to innovate from field to fork to achieve resilient, thriving, and socially just food systems for all. BC Food Web is a web portal project which aims to increase access and connection to current research and other resource materials. In addition, it aims to encourage innovation between farmers and researchers for future project collaborations. The Faculty of Land and Food Systems is a world leader in integrated research, education, and service. The faculty aims to address critical global issues around human health and a sustainable food supply. Today's webinar topic is Eating Close to Home, Fostering Local Food Production During COVID-19. Éliane Verret-Fournier, Emma Bryce, and Dr. Lenore Newman will discuss their research and perspectives on how we might use COVID-19 as an opportunity to call for a more localized, resilient, and sustainable food system. We have invited panelists who will express their own views and opinions based on their expertise and lived experience. While these are not necessarily the views of the Center for Sustainable Food Systems or UBC, we strive to create dialogue with diverse perspectives. After each panelist gives a brief presentation, we will then move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have questions for the panelists, please navigate to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom control panel and share them with us. Also, feel free to upvote others' questions by clicking on the thumbs up symbol. If you would like the opportunity to chat with other attendees, feel free to open the UBC Farms Facebook page, where we are streaming on Facebook Live, and use the comment function to chat on there. Lastly, we would also like to acknowledge that these unprecedented times means that we all have new working conditions. Please bear with us and our speakers if there are any unexpected distractions or interruptions. First up, we have Éliane Verret-Fournier. Éliane Verret-Fournier is a manager of market development for the BC Ministry of Agriculture. Her work is aimed at building the local market and encouraging British Columbians to purchase local foods. She delivers on the Buy BC program, the province's domestic marketing program, promoting BC food and beverages to ensure consumers can easily identify and enjoy local food products while supporting farmers and businesses throughout BC. Welcome, Éliane.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I'm pleased to be here with you today. Let me get started. So over the last few months, I've realized more so than ever before how lucky we are to live in British Columbia and have this really richly beautiful province and bounty here. Did you know that in British Columbia, we produce and have access to over 200 land-based food products and probably over 100 water-based or water source, we're close to the ocean, food product as well. So for me, personally, the COVID crisis has highlighted the importance of our local food supply. And COVID has clearly demonstrated that our current food system is not perfect. And I believe that what COVID's done really is to provide us with the opportunity to address some of the issues of our food system, to increase its efficiency and to become more resilient. So today I'll go over some short-term and longer-term measures and programs that the BC Ministry of Agriculture offers to support farmers and food processors to continue to grow and succeed in the domestic market. And the message I want to convey to you today is simple. It's one that we can all play a part in supporting our industry by making a special effort to buy local, to buy BC. So since the start of the pandemic, there's been some significant shifts that have happened and place an incredible amount of pressure on our farmers and food processors across the province, but everywhere across the world, really. And over the last few months, I'm really impressed at how at the ministry staff has been working incredibly hard to find some short-term solution to address those urgent issues to support BC farmers during difficult times and times of uncertainty. So here is just a top 4 examples of short-term new initiatives that we have put in place during the pandemic. Farmers markets are in BC a fundamental part of our food system, and they come in many shapes and forms and sizes. They support a lot of different people all over this province, and they provide us access to fresh local products. And we've worked with the BC Association of Farmers Market to put in place an online platform so that their members could move to an online model. Now we have over seven farmers market that are have successfully adopted this new online platform and offer a range of options for consumers across the province to order local food online and either pick it up or have it delivered to home. So everything is sort of more customized towards that now. Another thing we've noticed is that consumer purchasing behaviors are changing. They're changing quite quickly and drastically over the last few months. So consumers are now shopping and purchasing online. They're looking for convenience and perhaps home delivery again. And the data has shown us that some of these habits and behaviors might be here to stay. And the reality is that businesses and farmers and food producers quickly need to adapt to this new reality of new behaviors. As the COVID has demonstrated, we can't always necessarily rely on traditional methods to get our products out to consumers. So to assist with that, the ministry has provided a new stream of funding to help farmers and food processors adopt e-commerce tools. So what this financial commitment did was to support farmers and food processor overcome some of the immediate loss of sales, allowing them to continue to operate and expand potentially their sales by moving their product to online to sell direct to consumer and explore potentially a bigger market locally. So we encourage food businesses to move towards integrating some sort of online presence going forward as part of their business model to ensure that they can be sustainable and overcome future disruptions. And potentially, as I mentioned, continue to grow locally, but potentially scale up and explore markets that are out of touch. Considering the uncertain and changing environment, again, another way that the ministry has supported farmers and producers is to invite them to zoom in on their vision and reassess their vision and adapt their business model to this new reality. So through our business planning program, so we've created a new funding stream. The COVID-19 Business Recovery Planning is a new program that helps BC farmers and processors develop and put in place a short-term and long-term recovery plan. So there is, again, some financial assistance to access business planning services and coaching to help businesses get access to qualified business consultants to discuss their vision and decide and determine what's the best way forward for them. Another area I'd like to cover today is how the ministry is continuing to support the industry scale up and succeed locally through so this programming is a really good framework and has a longer term impact on our industry and to create a stable domestic market. The ministry is working to increase the demand and sales of local food through our Feed BC and our Buy BC initiatives. So I'll describe a little bit more about those two initiatives. So at the onset of the pandemic, the ministry established a supply working group working through the Feed BC team and different staff across the ministry to help those farmers who may have been struggling because they were previously supplying to restaurants, and with restaurants closure, they were facing some either surplus or shortages of products. So we quickly tried to redirect their local food products to within the domestic local market, whether it was through retail or other channels. So this simple approach that we took, helping to channel food locally to support business pivot locally, is now sort of evolving into a longer term approach. We're working towards establishing more of a permanent directory or platform that would ultimately support business explore those new sales channels and connect local buyers within BC. Now, it takes time to pivot. It doesn't happen overnight. This is also something about matching local demand and local supply. So it needs to include a lot of a large network, and sometimes creative solution and innovative processes or technologies are part of the solution. So a little bit more about the Feed BC initiative. So Feed BC is a program that helps the use of BC grown and BC processed foods used in hospitals and other government facilities. So there is certainly a priority for the ministry. And we know that supplying the healthcare system with local food products offer a lot of opportunities. It makes a lot of sense. So through this Feed BC initiative, the ministry's recently identified high-in-demand food products in BC healthcare facilities and with the potential to be sourced and supplied locally. So the ministry will be using these findings to better understand the market opportunities for local farmers and processors who are interested in selling through healthcare facilities. Finally, the last initiative and talk about today is the Buy BC initiative. So Buy BC is a province-wide marketing program. It's supported by several components. BC Partnership Program, which provides about $2 million in cost share funding every year to help BC farmers and processors deliver marketing campaign and promotional activities and to promote their products locally within the province. So this program also provides access to companies with a free Buy BC logo, and that logo and that brand is a brand that's really recognized at the consumer level, and that can be used by businesses on their product packaging and integrated as part of their promotional materials. And at the end of the day, we believe that the Buy BC logo makes it easier for British Columbians to identify BC grown, BC raised, and BC made product, especially in a crowded environment like at retail. And for that reason, over the last couple of years, the ministry's partnered with two major retail grocers here in BC. We've partnered with Safeway and Thrifty food stores to promote BC food products with point of sale signage at retail. So through this Buy BC promotion, the ministry is making it easier for consumers to identify BC products at retail in over 40 British Columbian communities. And lastly, the Buy BC program really relies heavily on our advertising campaign. This year, we plan to deliver a broader campaign that focuses on COVID recovery efforts. And this campaign is truly an opportunity for us to build the local food literacy of BC consumer and to focus consumer on motivating consumer to purchase made in BC and BC produce products. Finally, I've provided you with a lot of information and a few examples only of how at the ministry we're working hard to support our industry and get through these difficult times and ensure that we truly build a resilient industry and that we are able to adapt to our changing environment. And at the end of the day, the message is this: British Columbian, as we increase our demand for local products, our farmers, our producers, our harvesters and processors will be able to sell more produce and product, which will in turn help provide a safe and secure food supply for all of us. So if you're wondering what steps that you can take and how you can make a difference today, well, the choice is really simple. It's make it local, Buy BC, and I encourage you to visit your favorite farm, purchase local fish from your local fishmonger, visit your local restaurants or order food from your local restaurant, and we'll get through this together. One last final thing I will leave you with is the ministry offers a wide range of resources, programs, services to help business succeed in BC. So I invite you to visit AgriService BC, and you can simply Google AgriService BC to learn more about our services. And to find out more about Buy BC, visit buybc.gov.bc.ca. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Éliane, for that wonderful presentation. I loved hearing about the farmers market moving to an online model. That's really cool, and I know it's something a lot of businesses have been doing during this time. So it's really cool to hear about how your work is also helping farmers markets to move online. So thank you. Next up, it is my pleasure to introduce Emma Bryce. Emma Bryce sits on a variety of agricultural boards at the local, provincial, and national level. Her interests are rooted in regenerative farming practices and local food sustainability, with a focus on small-scale meat production. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, Katie. Thank you very much. So hi, everyone. I decided for the purposes of this discussion that I'm really going to focus in on small-scale meat production in local food systems, just because this is an issue that is really close to my own heart as a small-scale meat producer myself. But I do encourage you in the question period, if you have questions about any of the young farmer challenges or organizations that I work with, please feel free to pose your questions there, because I'd be more than happy to answer them. So first up, just to kind of talk a little bit about some of the challenges to small scale meat production. So if I go to the first slide here, small scale meat production, realistically, when we're looking at what the challenges are, they lie around access to year-round reliable slaughter and then processing. So for a quick kind of backstory for maybe folks that don't really know how this works in BC, we have 4 different license designations for slaughter facilities. So your first 2 are going to be your Class A and your Class B slaughter establishments, and so those are located around BC. There's a number of different locations. The difference between the 2 basically being is that a Class A is an establishment that can both slaughter and process, so doing your cutting and wrapping, whereas a Class B can only slaughter. And the main aspect of these facilities is that they are government inspected, and so they will always have a government inspector on site at all times looking at every single animal that goes through them. So those are your 2 kind of main facilities. If you're looking to sell meat off of the farm to consumers in BC and have it claimed as farm status, you have to have your animals go through a provincially inspected facility in order to be able to do that. So the other 2 options that are available are either your Class D licenses or your Class E licenses. And so Class D is one that allows for up to 25 animal units, and these can then be sold direct to customer or for secondary retail sales. So that would be to things like restaurants or to butcher shops. One of the caveats with this is that it has to be within a designated region. So there are a few designated regions that you are allowed to apply for a Class D license, and then a Class E license is somewhat kind of a step below that, and so that is allowing for on-farm slaughter for up to 10 animal units, and that's only direct sale to consumer, again, specifically within your region. So the next slide looks at some of BC's designated areas. So this is a really nice visual to just give you an idea. The areas in red are the ones that are your designated areas that you're allowed to apply for a Class D or a Class E license. As you can see, they are very rural, they're quite remote, and so the reason behind this, this regulation is that folks that are in these regions typically have to travel upwards of 2 hours to get to a Class A or a Class B slaughter facility, and so they've allowed to have the Class D and the Class E licenses as something that you can apply for to limit some of that travel time for your animals. So one of the really interesting things that has happened because of COVID is the newly designated areas that can apply for your Class D and your Class E licenses. So if you see in the Burgundy, we have a couple new areas, and it was decided that those ones are actually, they've lessened the travel time from 2 hours down to 1 hour. So that's why these new designated areas have been created, which is a step in absolutely the right direction. But as you can tell, it certainly leaves a lot of the rest of BC in a quite literal gray area here. And so these are areas where access to slaughter very much depends on the availability of the processing facilities in that area. So on the next slide, I just am going to focus a little bit here on the Fraser Valley and then the Greater Vancouver Regional District. So you can see in the Fraser Valley, and I just pulled this off of the BC provincial government, their public list of meat plants by region. So on this, we can see that there are 3 different poultry processing establishments. Out of those 3, though, unfortunately, Greendale Poultry no longer is in business. Las Palamos Farms does not do custom processing. And when you're looking at something like Fraser Valley Specialty Poultry, they have a charge per bird of $8.50 with a minimum of $500. So you're looking at 60 birds of a minimum. And for anybody who has produced small-scale poultry on pasture, once you look at factoring in the cost of your chicks, plus the cost of a minimum of 6 weeks of feed, and then look at $8.50 for processing costs on your birds, you can see that your profit margins start to disappear fairly quickly. So This is just to kind of highlight some of the issues that are facing, especially poultry is a really difficult one. But then, you know, you look at other things, so like Johnson Packers, they unfortunately, although it says on this that they process cattle, they do not as of last year. So they're predominantly looking at things like hogs and sheep and goats. And then on the next slide here, it kind of goes into a couple more. So this does give us a little bit more options. But with the majority of all of these processors, that top one that doesn't actually have a name is, again, doesn't do custom. But with all of these facilities, our major problem is that when you look to book in your animals, you're looking at least a 3 to 4 month waiting period. So for a lot of producers, they are not able to get their animals in a timely manner, and so it really makes a huge bottleneck when it comes to trying to get your product to your consumers. I know I was chatting with a farmer friend the other day, and she was basically saying that she would rather, one of her steers got out, and she said that because she's having such a hard time getting a slaughter spot, she would rather have lost her steer to her neighbor's farm, because by the time that she actually gets him slaughtered, he will have cost her more in feed than she's able to get for him at a market price. And she sells premium price cuts at Vancouver-based markets. So she was just saying she has no idea how folks that are selling it, you know, either a half or a whole side of an animal are able to make a profit in this kind of market. So if we go to the next slide here, COVID-19 has really kind of highlighted a lot of these issues. I know it's made a lot of media attention when we look at outbreaks of COVID-19 at poultry processing plants, and then again over at Cargill in Alberta, which is one of the biggest meat processing facilities in Western Canada. And so I think that this has really highlighted the need for locally based supply chains, and absolutely has reinforced the need for increased processing facilities, and whether or not that means allowing more areas to open up to things like Class D and E licensing, or just pushing and supporting the ability for processing facilities to come into fruition. And this is definitely not at just a provincial level, but absolutely at a municipal level as well. I know that there's a lot of red tape and regulations that go behind trying to set up or start up a processing facility. But as Éliane said, there's a huge increase in public demand for local meat. So I think that this is a really valuable conversation to be having right now. If we go to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about some of these responses that from COVID-19 and some of the opportunities that we can look at here. So like I already said, those new Class D designated areas being added was a really big step in the right direction. Alberta has recently created their uninspected slaughter operation license. And so this is given farmers in Alberta the opportunity to sell their animals live, and then give the customers the option to have them slaughtered on farm. And that is only for the consumer to consume within their own direct family unit. So it's another step in the right direction, and a lot of BC farmers are pushing to follow suit. The Small Scale Meat Producers Association is an organization that has been doing just a tremendous amount of work on this issue. COVID-19 has really kind of brought about these unique opportunities for farm direct marketing, and especially when it comes to online orders. As consumers are getting more comfortable with ordering online, I think it gives farmers this really beautiful opportunity to start looking at being able to diversify how they get their product out there. But if they're unable to get their animals processed, then they can only go so far. So I think a lot more work definitely needs to be done. And then just lastly, on my last slide here, there was a really amazing article, or open letter, I should say, that was penned by some great organizations such as Farm Folk, City Folk, Young Agrarians, KPU was in on this, as well as UBC. And they do have some incredible policy recommendations that were made for helping build a really resilient food system. And quite a few of these do kind of tie in towards the idea of supporting small scale meat production. And so I really encourage everybody to take a look at this open letter, and then also join your voice in and talk to your municipal and provincial governments, and just encourage them to support small scale meat producers in any way that they can. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was super fascinating. I appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge and expertise, and just to give everyone all the context of what it is to be a small meat producer, and then the availability and access to slaughter facilities. It's really important to know about that and understand what that all means. So thank you so much for all that information. So finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Lenore Newman. Dr. Lenore Newman, the author of Lost Feast, Culinary Extinction and the Future of Food, is also the director of the Food and Agriculture Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley, where she holds a Canada Research Chair in Food Security and the Environment. Dr. Newman researches global food trends, farmland use, and emerging agricultural technologies. Welcome, Dr. Newman.
Great to be here, and it really is nice to be here today. And it's a really interesting time to work in the food system. And I grew up in the food industry. My family has been in food for hundreds of years. And as noted, I currently direct the Food and Agriculture Institute at University of Fraser Valley, looking at the big picture. And so I'm kind of going to be pulling out and doing some big picture discussion in my little slice of time here. Now, usually agricultural policy is pretty low on everyone's radar, which is a bit of a sad statement, but it's true. But thanks to COVID, suddenly everyone is asking questions about how do we source our food. And certainly for me and my colleagues working in this area, we've really never been busier. It's crazy. I want to talk a little bit today about what the future of food might look like, drawing a few lessons from the current crisis. I do have to begin by saying the global food system has stood up surprisingly well to what is one of the biggest disruptions in the last century. We were all a little shocked that we still have full shelves for the most part, but there are weaknesses, and these weaknesses were already there. They're just clearer now. And they fall into categories such as labor. There just isn't enough of it. Underproduction of fruits and vegetables, something that's been well documented as a problem. And an animal protein chain that focuses on cheap meat. And it's failed multiple times during the pandemic. It's perhaps been the weakest part of the system. To simplify enough things for what is a fairly short talk, I want to look at the global food system and how it provides abundant carbohydrates and protein very cheaply. That's what it does well. However, it does so at the cost of the environment, at the cost of workers, and at the cost of animal welfare. Produces about 90% of the calories on Earth, though. So if you're going to your farmer's market, as I sometimes do, you are the outlier. So there's value in that global system, despite its weaknesses. However, we also often talk, especially in the West, it's a bit of a Western thought, that there's a group of alternative production methods with some good advantages, some of them, namely local production, better balance of nutrition and flavor outcomes in fruit and veg, and better environmental outcomes. Slightly better on animal welfare, but probably not good enough, and also problems of scaling. So the biggest problem is doesn't scale, and also suffers from the same labor shortages. The labor shortages haunt you no matter what you're doing. So I have a few statements that I make that are usually kind of controversial. And the first one is that neither group of producers, be they industrial scale or alternative scale, are using technology effectively, as they've been too reliant on cheap labor. And this is quite well documented in the literature that agriculture as an industry does not adopt the latest technologies with a quick enough pace. And in the case of industrial farmers, we do a kind of geographical arbitrage. And I should say, I usually am working with the really large parts of the industry, and they get cheap labor by either physically bringing it here using temporary foreign workers, which leads to some really terrible problems. Those people work in quite dangerous situations for low pay, and their long-term injuries are sent back to another country, so we don't have to deal with them. Or big companies grow food afar and use cheap labor there and cheap land. And it's a form of geographical arbitrage. Now, definitely the alternative system is better, although it tends to rely on volunteerism and on sustainable sweat equity. And what we find is long-term, some of the smaller scale producers find they break down. It's just not sustainable personally without some sort of assist. So what does the ideal system of the future look like? Well, I want to talk about a few things. First, we need to increase local production. Our long supply chains are vulnerable to disruption, and we're outsourcing environmental damage and poor ethical practices. And the product we get is really low quality sometimes. If you've ever bought romaine lettuce in February, you know what I mean. It's not a good product. And it's the example I use because it's so easy to produce year-round here. And to do this year-round in Canada, we need a mix of outdoor and indoor production, including greenhouse technology, which has moved forward really quickly. And if we look to countries like Iceland, they're doing this really well. Environmentally friendly, lots of use of new technologies like LEDs and new materials. And that shift lets us also move away from one form of labor exploitation, in that if we're producing year-round, we can employ workers year-round. We can also supplement with technology to lower the number of rote, very difficult tasks that are hard on human bodies and can be done in other ways. And this is going to be a bigger and bigger problem. And one of the nice things, it'll help us produce more fruit and vegetable because we're not eating enough and we know it. And our population is aging. Physical jobs on the farm are very punishing. And we know that over the last 10,000 years, technology has allowed us to replace brutal hand labor with easier methods. And you know, I've often said the farmer of the future might spend a lot more time at the keyboard. They're probably still going to be outside there doing their thing. I certainly hope so. I mean, you know, I like that part of the industry, but might be more of a balance. Second, the current system. So number one, if we look at localization. Secondly, though, the current system is over-reliant on petrochemicals, and we know that. And we need to take lessons from regenerative agriculture, mix them with technological solutions, such as better genetics. One of my favorite examples is Terra Mera here in British Columbia. They're trying to genetically alter crops to produce nitrogen themselves, which is one of the reasons I'm agnostic on GMOs. There's some really clever applications I think we need to be looking at. And also, of course, if we localize our food, we lower the transport factor. And the fact we get almost all of our romaine from California when it's an easy crop to grow, 0 cents, and it's just wasted carbon. Thirdly, and those of you know me know I beat this drum pretty hard, we have to move away from mass animal agriculture, and we already are. And we need to push that further. Currently, 12% of the Earth's surface is in cropland and 25% is in grazing. Of that 12%, 70% of the calories go to animals. Even here in the lower mainland, where young farmers are desperate for land, the #1 crop by area is animal feed, namely corn and grass. And you can ask, well, why? It's because especially the larger animals are very inefficient at turning calories into more calories. And what we know is we cannot scale the meat industry to feed everyone on Earth the amount of meat that we eat, and we probably shouldn't if we look at the health outcomes. And so really the alternative protein market is a huge potential for this province. And we have things like oats and peas are becoming really common sources of protein. And the Peace region can certainly grow these. The prairies can grow them. In fact, Saskatchewan is doing so well with oat production that they're starting a second processing plant for oats because the demand for oat milk is so high. If you've tried oat milk, you know it works pretty well. Now, I'm a fisherman's daughter. I grew up in the meat industry, in the slaughter industry. But as someone who sees behind the scenes as part of my job, I can say it just isn't sustainable. Animal ethics have barely been on the radar, and they absolutely need to be. You will note there's always a great effort put into hiding what goes on behind that industry. There's a reason. And really, as other alternatives come on board, we have to shift over. And we can see this to a degree in the dairy industry. Dairy industry I work with closely, but 70% of dairy product goes into the dry milk industry that goes into food additives. We can replace that with plant alternatives and no one will even notice it's gone. You still have your artisan cheese, you still have your Avalon dairy, but the suffering and environmental impact that single step takes dwarfs. If we close the entire aviation industry tomorrow, which we kind of did, if we do that, it's not nearly as effective as just replacing dry milk with alternatives. And that's what we're looking at. And the problem is globally, we're going the wrong way. In China right now, there's a dairy with 100,000 cows. The environmental impact of that single business puts it as one of the largest greenhouse gas producers on Earth. And we cannot go down that road. Now, I do want to touch briefly in my last couple minutes on the policy aspect of my work because I advise governments around the world on where to go with ag policy. And Emma brought up the open letter, which of course she did mention was directed partly against me. And more importantly, the Premier's food policy, food security task force, of which I am a member. A year and a half ago, the Premier reached out to me to see if I would co-author a report on the potential for agricultural technology to improve food security in British Columbia. And that report is public. You can find it online. And I just wanted to briefly touch on our recommendations just to show what direction we might take. And the first was that BC should adopt the UN Sustainable Development Goals with respect to food and agriculture. And that includes goals like cutting food waste by 50% by 2030. And what I really like about that is it makes our goals measurable and measurable on a global scale. So when we export our food, we can say it meets this global standard. We recommended the funding of a multi-institution higher education center in agri-tech. And that's partly because we need skilled workers, but also in Canada, agricultural research falls in the cracks. It doesn't quite fit in any of the university funding envelopes easily. And unlike in the US, we don't have a sort of dedicated giant pocket of money like USDA. Or in the Netherlands, they have what they call the Golden Triangle, where there's this pocket of research money. It kind of would give us a little more heft in developing made in BC solutions because our ag industry is quite unique. Thirdly, in a related vein, we recommended funding an incubator accelerator program to make sure that our startup companies can really compete on a world level. And lastly, we did ask also that a section of land in the province be set aside to encourage agri-tech if it's not currently being used for other agricultural purposes. And one of the reasons I was willing to say that, and I've based my career on protecting the ALR to make sure it doesn't turn into housing, so we have a place to farm. But currently about half of the Lower Mainland's ALR is underused. And partly that is because it's just so hard for young entrepreneurs to get out there and start businesses. And we really want to be facilitating that. So in conclusion, I really just want to say it's a really exciting time to be in agriculture in general and agri-tech specifically. There's so much happening in this sector. And as we move forward, a better food system isn't just possible, it's, I think, quite close. And I may even live to see proper romaine grown in this province.
Thank you so much, Dr. Newman, for that really very thoughtful and really interesting talk. I liked what you were kind of going big picture and thinking about what would be an ideal food production system to kind of think if, at this point or going forward, and what might the ideal situation look like. So thank you so much for your presentation and all of your knowledge. Thank you. All right, so at this point, I believe we're going to move on to the Q&A round. And so for everyone out there, feel free to keep submitting your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started with a question. And I'll just pose this, and any of the panelists can feel free to answer, or all of the panelists can feel free to answer. All right, so the first question, is local food production capable of meeting local demand? If not, what other adaptations are necessary for our food system to be sustainable in the long term?
I'm happy to take a first crack at that, given I spend a lot of my life thinking about that question. In short, no, it isn't, but that's okay. And that's the kind of two-part answer I like to give. We are quite capable of being completely sustainable in fruits, vegetables, especially if we're using year-round production with technology, in the meat industry, the dairy industry. We don't need to produce grain and pulses because the people next door do. And so the short answer might be no, but the long answer is we could do way better with just a bit of technology and a bit of very thoughtful trade, and re-examining why do we bring everything from California. Maybe we should be producing here and trading more locally within a regional bubble.
With the other, any Emma or Éliane, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Sure. I can certainly talk a little bit about how this COVID crisis is sort of given some of us a reality check in terms of selling to the local market instead of whether it is exporting. Let's just say, for example, the blueberry market is producing blueberries so much that we can't all eat locally. So there is certainly a lot of production, as Dr. Lenore said, for fruits and vegetables. And we're looking at, how do we preserve and keep that production locally while we can freeze, dry and process some of those products and repurpose them and transform them. And so there is certainly that that we need to think about. And same thing for the seafood industry and fish. There is, lots, and there is lots available, and there is just some limited demand locally there too. So for some sectors, we're doing okay. But yeah, it's not an easy answer to an easy question to answer.
Okay, I can follow up with a second question. It's somewhat related to this first one as well. So how can we intersect the topics around access and affordability into this conversation?
So I'll hop on this one. I think that when it comes to questions of access and affordability, it really it has to do a lot with the idea of scale and how we look at that. So I know I was kind of giving a quick look at some of the other questions that were being posed, and one of them was kind of talking about how they would really love to support local, but it very much is a budgetary issue. And this is something that, coming from the lens of a small scale meat producer, I see this a lot. It costs a lot more to produce the animals that I raise, specifically because I don't have that same scale. And so a lot of folks find it really difficult to support farmers who really do have to charge enough to be able to make a living wage and kind of make a profit on their animals. So adding that into the conversation, I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to that. I think that as we have increasing demand for some of these kind of smaller scale products or producers, that perhaps that will become a little bit more accessible for the farmers to be able to kind of work their prices around that. But I think that this is where we look at perhaps opportunities for farmers to band together in terms of things like cooperatives, so that they can pool resources and have have their products be available on a wider scale, to allow some more of that accessibility, so that perhaps if they have a leg, then other farmers can kind of pick up that slack. So just a general kind of idea of how that might look.
Éliane or Lenore, any thoughts on how we can intersect these topics about access and affordability?
It's a very complex question because it intersects every other part of life in BC. And in a lot of ways here in BC, the main problem is housing is really, really expensive. And you almost have to solve that problem first, because the problem is we made food cheaper. That was what we did over the last century. We cut the cost of food by about 80%. Like seriously, it used to be about half of our budgets. And all that happened was housing got expensive. So it's kind of a outside of my realm level of question, but it is one we have to keep in mind. And it is a good question to ask, could we really have an equitable food system in an inequitable system? And the answer is probably no.
Okay, thank you for those answers. We've got more questions coming in, so I'll go on to the next one. This one is in particular for Éliane. So Éliane, how might the ministry support technology integration and uptake for small food businesses if food access is going online? How can barriers to access to, let's say, high-speed internet be addressed?
Thanks for the question. That's certainly a great question. It's not one that I think is necessarily an easy answer. Accessibility to technology obviously it can be challenging depending on where you're located in BC. And yeah, I certainly understand where that question's coming from. This is not a solution for everyone in terms of going to sell and scale up to produce, to sell your product online. If selling through the physical farmers market or selling through your local community works for you, and maybe that's how you want to stay and keep your business to that scale, then that is how you should keep doing your business. Obviously, there are some options available. So again, I invite you to take a look at the different services and programs that we offer on the ministry's website and see if there's anything out there that meets your need.
Thank you very much. So the next question, this is for Emma and Lenore. What are some strategies to move away from large-scale meat production like you have suggested? So there's a connected question but I'll let you guys kind of answer first.
Well, I can take a stab at this one first. I think that if we're looking to move away from large-scale animal production, we need to take a deep look at how consumers are buying and using animal products in the first place. So one of the kind of the biggest issues is that when you look at a lot of smaller scale meat production, typically producers will sell their animals either by the half side or a whole. And one of the main considerations is that for the majority of folks who are living in kind of denser areas, they really just don't have the storage space to be able to keep a half or a whole animal, and it's a kind of an unrealistic ask to be able to have, someone in an apartment store half a cow, right? So I'd say that kind of what has come up in a lot of my conversations with many folks is just this idea of they would like to be able to support smaller scale producers, but they just don't know how to make that happen. And so one of my suggestions that I usually kind of try to give in that scenario is the idea of going into it with other families is a nice way of doing it, but it really does require rethinking how we interact with our meat. Another kind of thing that I come across often is that people like to have their meat and have it fresh. And so when you're buying from a small scale producer, it's going to be frozen. And so these are really just kind of ways that you can reframe how you think about looking at your meat consumption. Another way I think that is kind of a branch into a different type of small scale production is kind of what I suggested already, but this idea of maybe cooperatives within farmers or farms, and having, say, a bunch of farms who get together who all sell maybe complementary different types of products. I know there's quite a few in the Fraser Valley who do things like online ordering systems where you can actually see their inventory and just cuts of their products, and they will have them available for pickup either on the farm or at local farmers markets where they will be at. And so these kind of offer a really nice bridge into supporting that type of smaller agriculture, especially when it comes to smaller producers. I find that a lot of them struggle to have a reliable or consistent supply year round. And so the idea of these cooperatives, I think, is a nice way of say, if you have a customer base that would like to see kind of this reliable source of meat and you may not be able to meet that demand, then you have other farms that you can kind of piggyback off of so that you're able to get your consumers' needs met. So these are some of the ideas that I think would be helpful in kind of getting to that point. But realistically, consumers need to maybe rethink a little bit about how they buy their meat and how they use it and what that looks like.
Yes, and I guess I would add to that, there is no bigger thing for the environment that you can do than just walking away from meat and dairy consumption. For a pure energetics question, it's number one. But the nice thing is it's incremental. And it's not like buying a Tesla, where now you've bought this car and you're a Tesla person and you don't have any money because you bought a Tesla. You literally can make that decision every day. And what I like to tell people is, if you walk into a store and you see one of those rotisserie chickens and it's like a couple bucks, yeah, it's tempting. It's a couple bucks for a chicken. That's amazing. Except what you're not paying for is the environmental damage, the animal ethics, and the labor conditions. And all along the chain, there's this terrible stuff happening that lets you pay almost nothing for meat. And making thoughtful decisions less often is a really good approach. And I do feel there is a policy side of this. It's really lonely if you're a broccoli farmer in this world. You don't have subsidies, you don't have lobbyists, you farm broccoli, you're not having a great life. The meat industry has gotten away with really a lot, especially the big producers, because they have lobbyists. They have a lot of support in government. They have policies written to make their life easier. And to be honest, to make people like Emma, they make your life harder, because it's all geared toward that big, cheap industrial thing. And we're seeing what happens now during COVID is some of the worst failures because of that. And really, I think we do need to be lobbying our governments. Hey, could we please have a little love for smaller producers and for people who grow fruits and vegetables, because they're kind of suffering.
Thank you, Emma and Lenore. Éliane, did you have anything you wanted to add on that question? Okay. And yeah, the follow-up was actually about options to create co-op processing, and Emma, you gave us some great answers about that, so thank you very much. All right, so we're going to go into the next question. Is there potential for us to invest in local food production in urban spaces, like community gardens, during COVID-19?
I have to leap in on that one because yes, so big. And I was not a believer at first. I thought it was a bit gimmicky, all this vertical farming. In my time working this beat over the last few years, I think the one that really got to me was when Singapore announced they were going to produce 50% of their food domestically by 2030. They have zero farmland. So you're like, how? And when I started to dig into it and go around the world and see these operations, the technology has come forward so much that there are a number of crops we can grow in an urban environment easily and with much better outcomes. And, you know, I've mentioned romaine lettuce a few times. You can tell I kind of like romaine lettuce. But we bring it from California. We bring 91% of the North America's strawberries are produced in California. 91%. We can grow them here and year round. And a lot of the technology is moving quickly. We have indoor aquaculture that's coming along. Yes. So short answer, yes. I'd really love to see the government, and the part of the government sitting here, I'd love to see them roll out some big support for the agri-tech that would make that possible.
Emma or Éliane, would you like to jump in on that question?
Yeah, just to echo what Lenore, Dr. Lenore mentioned, I think there's a huge opportunity to invest in there. And it is certainly something that requires a lot of innovation and a lot of partnership at the local level to see that happen. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
I'll also just jump in and kind of add to that I think that this is definitely an opportunity for post-secondary institutions. Lenore is at UFE, and UFE has a fantastic agriculture program, and I think that this is really one of those opportunities where post-secondary institutions can hop in and start kind of showing how that could look, and kind of come up with profitable business models, so that folks that are looking to get into it can see that it is actually a viable business model.
Great, thank you all so much. I have a couple related questions, but they're a little bit more detailed, so I'm going to ask them. So in addition to AgriService BC, what other resources are available to support small-scale growers or small-scale fruit and vegetable value-add businesses to get started? And then a related question is just what are financial incentives and supports are, if they aren't available, I guess, what kind of incentives and supports are needed to support small-scale producers to move and grow forward?
So I'll take this on. I guess this is directed more so at me. And there's a number of different resources locally. It depends on where you see yourself going and then what type of support you're looking for, whether it is business planning, coaching, or there's lots of resources that are just for reference, whether you're interested in entering the retail market or selling through your local farmers market. So there's a range of resources that the ministry offers, and to so from really small scale all the way through export. So yeah, I invite you to take a look. The agribusiness website is a first stop shop, but there is a wide range of resources available that our ministry offers, but there's also a few other government ministry grant programs as well. I'm thinking of a small scale BC business program. So there's a wide range of programs out there.
Dr. Newman or Emma, any additional thoughts on that question? Okay, great. So shifting gears a little bit, so how do we as consumers demand for policy change? For example, decreased factory farming or more ethical sourcing of food, switching to plant-based alternatives where possible. So what can we as consumers do?
Just sort of in a general way, I think one of the things I love about food is how consumers have much more agency in food than almost anything else. And I mean, there are still realities of cost and the fact that our society is very unequal. But food, we really do have a lot we can do, especially in a region where we have so little choice over how we live and where we live because of cost that no government seems capable of getting a handle on. And so I think one of the nice things is access to entry is pretty low, is just start learning about food, sort of feel, there's a lot of really great material out there. And I mean, we're all watching a ton of Netflix. I mean, I really like things like, there's a great one, Salt, Fat, Heat. I can't remember the words. A few really good pieces out. There's also some really good plant-based stuff coming out. And people can kind of make their own choices. And what I love is it won't be the same for everyone. Everyone has to see what fits in their sort of cultural background or their personal preference and, make it work. I'm very into oat milk, partly because I'm a little lactose intolerant, and oat milk is just a wonderful, great thing. And I urge everyone to get out there and try it. But, you might find it doesn't work for you. And so I think just be curious and realize there's no wrong. And if you do it wrong, well, you're going to get up tomorrow and eat again. So it's a pretty low-cost failure.
Éliane, any thoughts on that question? Okay, and it looks like Emma is maybe just technical difficulties, but hopefully she'll be back with us here soon. But I can move on to another question. This is a really interesting one. So how might investments in local food production look different across different regions in BC? So like, what does eating close to home look like in Vancouver opposed to the interior or in northern BC?
I can take a crack at this. Obviously, it is different. We do have, regions that produce specific crops or different products. We're blessed. I live on Vancouver Island, and we're surrounded by the ocean. So for me, it's a natural go-to. It's widely available, but I feel that we're all blessed to have those seasonal items close to us. Because of our climate, we have local seasonal products year-round, pretty much, right? Whether it is, BC eggs, or BC cheese is available and close to us year-round. Processed foods, in each of our regions. We know someone who processes BC granola, or whether it is local lettuce. It may not be that romaine lettuce, but it could be another variety, right? We all have access to those local items, which I find is great. So it's about taking advantage of seasonality and what's offered close to home.
Yeah, and I would add that it's always best to go crop by crop, because there is no one silver bullet answer. I am quite happy eating grains from the prairies because they're grown there. It's really efficient. It's a perfect place to grow them. They're put on rail cars. They kind of roll downhill to us. It's a really great chain. I am quite happy to use my weirdly exotic cinnamon because it is a wooden product that was actually the first global food trade product. It's so durable. You can put it on a ship, take it off a year later, and you're good to go. Whereas if I'm on Vancouver Island and I'm surrounded by water, I probably want to look and see what I can eat out of there. And I know it's going to be good. It's going to be flavorful. The people doing it really know what they're doing. And I might do that instead of like saying, oh, maybe I'll have lobster. Why would you do that? You have all these perfectly great options that are local. And so I think you really have to go product by product, and it might vary a bit. But it is tricky for the consumer because we don't pay the actual price of transport. So it's always a little tricky, but kind of look at it. And if it's a mango and someone flew it from Australia yesterday, you probably know that isn't the best environmental choice when you have fresh pears. So once again, just kind of crop by crop, common sense usually wins the day.
Thank you so much. And welcome back, Emma. We are glad to have you back. It looks like you had some technical difficulties, but welcome back. I just want to repeat this question because I think you might have some really interesting insights, Emma. So the question was, how might investments in local food production look different across different regions in BC? So what does eating closer to home look like in Vancouver as opposed to the interior? So that was the question we were just talking about.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. I definitely, one of the enjoyments of somewhat rural life is that I don't always get the best internet connection. So thanks for posing that question again. I didn't hear all of Éliane's answer, but I definitely agree with Lenore on this one, is that this is something where you do have to look at things at a product by product basis, and kind of really take a look at where they come from and how they're grown. I think that here in the Fraser Valley, we are so fortunate because we have such a beautiful growing climate, and it really supports a wide variety of crops. So for folks that are in the Fraser Valley, our version of eating local is quite different from everybody else in the province, and so we're quite fortunate in that respect. And then I also think that for those that are living in other regions of BC, that they're also used to eating somewhat differently, and their idea of eating local is going to be somewhat different. So kind of just tying back to that question that we talked about before in terms of what a more small scale meat system might look like, is that when you're looking at regional areas in BC, the idea of buying a half a cow or anything along those lines is not an uncommon thing. In fact, it's quite accepted and expected. And so I think that really is just something that needs to be highlighted, is that the ways in which we think about food regionally are quite different, and I think that there are definitely ways that we can kind of support that in terms of actual investments. I think that really just making sure that we have that kind of robust food supply system, especially in kind of your more rural areas, having those farmers markets, and having access to those farmers markets. The work that the government did about helping move those farmers markets online, I think, was very timely. It was really great for farmers markets to have been deemed an essential service. And so, keeping that accessibility open, I think, is a really important way of helping folks, no matter what region that they're in, being able to access their local food supply.
Thank you so much. This is a question I wanted to ask. I know we've talked about cooperatives a little bit, but just if the panelists had any other insight, how are local farmers adapting to meet increased local demand?
I hate to burst people's bubbles, but the truth is local demand is still tiny. Not in every commodity, because of the supply management, by definition, all those crops are 100% consumed in province. So it's kind of a different system. But for most of the farmers I work with, it's a small piece, but it is a bit of a critical piece. And I would say that one of the good things it can do is it adds in an extra little higher income stream, because people do pay a premium for fresh. And they're really suffering this year. And I would say consumers should go out and buy BC local produce right now, especially blueberries, because the farmers are struggling. Now, you might get there and they may not have any because there isn't enough labor. So maybe take some buckets. It's a great year to do some U-pick. Probably a really great place not to get sick is in a big open field. I can honestly say, though, we're going to have producers go bankrupt this year unless the ministry steps in a really big way. and it's a tragedy. But it isn't, the local isn't enough to offset what people make feeding into the global system. And so, for example, in blueberries, we actually produce about 15% of the global blueberries. And we don't think about that, but they're all taken, they're flash frozen, they're sent to Abbotsford International, they head out to China. They're a big deal. And if that chain isn't working during this crisis, those farmers will be in trouble.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. Éliane or Emma, any additional thoughts on that question? Okay, great. Next question. What dialogue and consultation with local First Nations is being pursued in regards to local food production? Or while you all think on that question, or we can come back to it. I'll ask another one, and we can come back to it if you want to think on it for a minute. How can we better connect food insecure people with local produce? So we've, thinking of more a little bit about affordability and accessibility. We talked about that a little bit, but now in particular, people who might be food insecure or maybe living in a food desert. How can we better connect those people with locally grown food?
That's a really hard problem. It has been a hard problem everywhere they've tried to take it on. One of the few successes I've documented in my work was in the US, SNAP food stamps were amended to be used at farmers markets. That was a great program that I believe may have been rolled back now by a less friendly government that doesn't believe that people on SNAP should eat fruit. And, why am I protecting them? It's terrible. It's evil. Because if any group needs access to this food, it's people who are poor enough they're on SNAP. And that was a good program. And I'd love to see more of that done here. I would love to see some funding from the provincial government to help capture the wastage. And I'm going to say a few numbers that are going to make everyone a little shocked. One of the ones that got to me and stuck in my head is I visited a cherry producer in the Okanagan who 10% of his best cherries go overseas. They're kind of the special cherries. They go to Switzerland, they go to Japan. 40% go to the local market. The other 50% he landfills because there is simply no way to get them into the food chain here. They're a little dented, they're not quite perfect, they don't go through the machines quite as well. I would love to see people working together. I don't care if they're giving them away. If the government is buying those things bulk and giving them away because they're perfectly fine. But for the farmer, he can't afford to lose money per pound on half of his crop. So he's burying it in the backyard. And his big complaint was he was like, I'm running out of area. I'm going to have to start paying to have this hauled away. I asked him, I'm like, well, why isn't Sunripe taking your cherries? Like, shouldn't they just come by with a big dump truck and take your cherries? Turns out they buy all their concentrates from China. And so they don't want any of the local fruit. So I think the government can step in here and say, okay, let's offer everyone cherries at like 50 cents a pound. And maybe they don't look great, but I think they should be out there. And I think it's actually morally wrong. We throw away so much food. And the numbers are shocking. Last year in cranberries in BC, it was about 20%. 20% of the crop, which we paid to grow, paid to harvest, and we dumped. Blueberries this year, I'll be surprised if it's under 50% that are dumped because we simply can't pick them. This is one of the biggest crises in BC. I would love to see action from the government to get food waste into a source of low cost, excellent food in food deserts, just available everywhere.
I totally agree with you on that one, Lenore. I think that food waste is an issue that we need to do some serious tackling on. Just to kind of come after your comment about the SNAP program. So in BC, we actually do have a very similar program. So that's the BC Farmers Market Nutrition Coupon program. And so I know that this one was kind of successfully rolled out back in 2015. The one thing that I don't know about this is how it has been operating since COVID. So I know that this particular program has been really successful and has been kind of implemented for a number of years. I know many folks that kind of work within this program. So I would be very interested to know how successful it has been and if it's been able to be continued on in a meaningful way with COVID happening. I don't know about that, but I do know that it's a really fantastic resource. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great. Thank you so much for that, for those answers. I wanted to, someone had a question about that I asked before, but just if there's, and if, you know, if there maybe are there any other resources that if people are interested in this topic about how First Nations people or even different, how there's diversity and diverse voices being included in local food systems or local food productions, those kinds of conversations. This is kind of our we're going to have to be our final question. Unfortunately, the time has just flown by. So I wanted to ask that again, or if there are any resources that are out there that people could take themselves to if they want to learn more about that.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at this. At the BC Ministry of Agriculture, we do have industry specialists that specialize into the different sectors and agroecologists who focus in different regions of the province. And we do have people who focus on building a relationship with First Nation communities and businesses who are from First Nation, because it is truly important for our government. So, and there is lots of different programming where we do, as part of the criteria, make it available to and give somewhat of a priority to support that diversity across the province. So whether it is to support smaller scale or new entrants that have a diverse background. So we want to be fair and representative and inclusive. So that's certainly part of the government's mandate. So again, I would direct you to the Agri-Service website to find out more about the different options available.
And Emma or Dr. Newman, any final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to specifically add in terms of resources or anything along those lines, but I do just think that it needs to be said that there's work that can be done here. I think that it's quite telling that when this question was first posed that all of us took quite a pause and didn't necessarily know exactly how to answer that, and I think that that's really reflective of maybe our relationship. And so I think that there's a lot of work that we can do, and there's a lot of opportunity to build relationships and really foster some working partnerships there. So I think that that's something that we should take into consideration.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much for your answers to those questions. All right, and even though we've had some great conversation and a lot of time to answer some questions, I know that there are still many unanswered questions. So for those of you who asked a question, and if we didn't have time for it today, we will try to answer these today after the webinar and follow up with more information about where to find this follow-up and dialogue. So stay tuned for emails that will be coming into your inbox soon. I would really like to thank so much our presenters, Éliane, Verret-Fournier, Emma Bryce, and Dr. Lenore Newman. Thank you so much for all of your time today and answering everyone's questions. Behind the scenes, we would also like to thank Jessica Lattis, Mairead Norton, Kate Hodgkin, and Anisha Sandhu. They've been the people behind these wonderful webinars, doing great work and organizing all of these. So thank you so much to them. I'd like to let you all know, so in 2 weeks, we will have a 7th episode of this webinar series. And this webinar will be called Farmers, Lessons Learned During the COVID-19 Pandemic, and that will be held on August 20th at 3 p.m. And finally, please do give us your feedback and let us know what you thought about the webinar. After you leave this webinar, you'll be directed to a short survey about this session, and we would really appreciate your feedback. So please partake in that survey. And finally, feel free to visit us at ubcfarm.ubc.ca for more information. And once again, thank you all very much for attending from near and far, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.